The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We talked extensively yesterday about the situation in Baltimore involving unrest, protests, mostly peaceful, and some violent activity and rioting. And the curfew, which was instituted last night, actually went pretty well. A lot of corporate media, they were just hanging around, Lewis, waiting for the chaos. And there really wasn't that much chaos. I mean, it was quiet all overnight up until the curfew ended early this morning. No reports of disturbances in the early morning hours. There was some kind of activity around 10 p.m. last night, but it was almost, Lewis, like corporate media wanted there to be chaos.
Of course they did. It makes for much better television. And do you think that the protesters have got it out of their system? Do you think that, I should say, maybe the rioters have got it out of their system?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, and we saw increasingly a movement of sort of counter rioters. So there were really not two groups. Some people would say, oh, there were peaceful protesters, overwhelming majority, and then there were rioters. But there were actually kind of three groups that developed. There were the peaceful protesters focusing on the issues around police brutality and this unbelievable story of how Freddie Gray was detained without force or incident and ended up with his spinal cord 80% severed and in a coma after 45 minutes in a police vehicle. Then there are the rioters. And then there are counter rioters who, whatever their views about the Freddie Gray situation, actually showed up, Lewis, to prevent rioting and looting.
Yes, there were many of those people. And there were there were many people coming out and submitting videos to YouTube and using social media to preach to the rioters that this is the wrong thing to do. Maybe that helped too.
And just before midnight last night, Baltimore Police Commissioner Anthony Batts said, "Oh, this curfew is absolutely a success." Quote, "We do not have a lot of active movement throughout the city as a whole. Tonight, I think the biggest thing is the citizens are safe. The city is stable. We hope to maintain it that way." I actually don't know this because I've never been in one of these curfew situations. If there's a curfew like this, does every business close? Like there's no 10 p.m. movie showings because there's a curfew. No bars or restaurants are open after 10. Is it that extensive? Or is it you can't be out in the streets, but if you're going from business to business, that would be okay?
I'm not really sure. I think that, usually curfew means nobody out and about after a certain time. I've dealt with something similar, I guess, when there are hurricanes in certain areas, like in Florida, they implement this, and that means nobody can be out. Of course, that's a little bit different because you're still at risk in your car moving around as well.
I played that clip for you yesterday from Fox News of Shepard Smith basically flipping out on his colleagues at Fox News, saying, "Why are we pointing fingers? Why are we blaming parents? Why are we blaming Al Sharpton or wondering where Al Sharpton is, when we should be covering what is going on?" And for me, covering what is going on includes that the majority of those protesters were completely peaceful. And that has not stopped conservative pundits and bloggers from just going on this frantic search for people or organizations to pin the Baltimore violence on. And there's a really interesting article in Talking Points memo summing up the blame game, and it points to 5 different entities or individuals that the right is desperate to blame. First is Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, saying that this is all the result of one comment that Stephanie Rawlings Blake made, which was, quote, "We also gave those who wish to destroy space to do that." And so Stephanie Rawlings Blake, the mayor of Baltimore, has been taking heat for that. Rush Limbaugh even went as far as to say that that response from the mayor is almost the type of thing that would cause the Benghazi terror attacks. Second was President Obama. Let's blame Obama. Real estate mogul Donald Trump blamed Obama, as well as the mayor, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, and saying this was ineffective leadership from Obama. Violence is spreading. Conservative news blogger Matt Drudge also tweeted something similar. So the mayor of Baltimore is to blame. Obama is to blame. How much more ridiculous can it get? Well, how about Democrats, right? Joe Walsh, the former Illinois Republican congressman and current talk show host, said Democrats are to blame because Democrats have, quote, purposely turned blacks into uneducated government slaves. Also at the National Review Online, Kevin Williamson said, when will the left be held to account for the brutality in Baltimore, brutality for which it bears a measure of responsibility on both sides? Then Al Sharpton is to blame. This was part of actually the Fox News Shep Smith clip from yesterday. Co-host Eric Boehning asked, where is Al Sharpton, for example, when, of course, Al Sharpton, I think, is a terrible spokesperson for African Americans, and I hope that he is relieved of that duty, self-proclaimed duty in many senses. But also, what does Al Sharpton have to do with this? And then lastly, the parents. Rand Paul talked about absent parents, saying this is not even fully a racial thing. It's not only a racial thing. This is just about parenting. The Five talked about that. Greg Gutfeld blaming the parents. Dr. Phil McGraw, pseudo-psychologist, pop psychologist, Dr. Phil, talking about blaming the parents. Here's my question, Lewis. Does the system of justice deserve any blame, right? A system where a black man is in custody in a police vehicle, 45 minutes later comes out with his spinal cord 80% severed and in a coma. No one knows what happened because the police say no force was used. Does that bear any blame in this flare-up?
I think assigning blame is fair as long as you are doing it within reason. I don't think you can point the finger. Can you really blame the police? But who is it that's responsible for letting these types of things happen over the decades with the police?
Exactly. Does the status quo of police brutality over the decades bear any responsibility?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I would say yes, but who can I point the finger at? That I might not be able to tell you.
Easier to blame Obama, I guess. And, you know, some of the right-wingers have been putting out Freddie Gray's rap sheet, right? The things that he's been in trouble with the law for. What about the Baltimore police force's rap sheet, which includes 100 settlements for police brutality or civil rights violations? Terrell Jenkins and Wesley Williams and Shayna Pendleton and, Janelle and Shakita Causey, Dottie Collier. I could go on and on and on and talk about Jerry L. Lyles. I could talk about Deacon Lornell Felder. We could do a whole show with that rap sheet. If we're going to put up Freddie Gray's rap sheet, and I don't know how that rap sheet makes it okay to have your spinal cord 80% severed inexplicably when you are in a police vehicle, then we should be going through the rap sheet of Baltimore police as well. It would only be fair.
It's fair. I think if you want to prevent this from happening in the future, if you want to solve this problem, it doesn't make much sense to start blaming Obama and Democrats because that will not help solve the problem in any way.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court and same-sex marriage. As you know, the Supreme Court is expected to potentially make a broad decision about the constitutionality of same-sex marriage bans at the state level sometime in June. Prior to the decision, of course, there are oral arguments, and those took place yesterday, and they centered around Michigan's same-sex marriage ban, but more broadly, same-sex marriage bans across the country. It's not clear what we are to expect. On the one hand, we've heard, I forget whether it was Clarence Thomas or Scalia, who said, in spite of my view, I believe that there are 5 of 9 votes on the Supreme Court which will make same-sex marriage bans illegal nationwide. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, even Anthony Kennedy, who is considered potentially the swing or deciding vote on this issue, said, if the definition of marriage as a man and a woman has been with us for millennia, why would the court be to say that we know better? But we can't really go by that because it's very common that Supreme Court justices ask devil's advocate questions during oral arguments, as they should. Just because Anthony Kennedy asked that isn't really telling us how he'll ultimately vote.
No, I guess it's an important part of the dialogue. I think that when I look at the Supreme Court, if I had to guess, I'd lean towards, of course, them ruling this unconstitutional, these bans. I mean, it seems like it's going to happen in every state eventually anyway, right?
It very well may. And on the one hand, so I'm kind of trying to think ahead, right? If bigotry comes out on top and the Supreme Court issues whatever ruling they want about Michigan, but they don't make a broad ruling, okay? That would be, I guess, in a way, bigotry coming out on top temporarily. The bigots will, of course, claim victory, even though you could still have more and more state-level bans on bans or just the legalization of same-sex marriage happening, and it wouldn't really matter what the Supreme Court ultimately decides about Michigan. On the other hand, if the Supreme Court does decide not only is the Michigan same-sex marriage ban not okay, same-sex marriage bans at the state level, period, are not okay, then we are going to see the bigots move in the direction of religious freedom to discriminate. And we're already seeing that, right? I mean, I feel like the last 12 to 18 months of so-called religious freedom bills are all kind of a preparation for what may happen on marriage.
Well, I think the religious freedom argument, even though there's been some success on that battlefront for the religious right recently, ultimately, I don't think that that's a battle they're going to win. I mean, every argument so far for the banning of these, for the removal of these marriage bans,
I guess we could say the outlawing of the bans.
The outlawing of the bans has been a constitutional argument, and countless states have agreed that it's unconstitutional. I mean, aren't these legal minds all, in the same realm here?
Isn't it all the same constitution? Although state constitutions can vary to certain degrees from the federal constitution. One other note, at the end of the first half hour, a man in the back of the gallery in the Supreme Court started shouting that same-sex marriage violates the Bible and that supporters are going to burn in hell. Antonin Scalia reportedly said that it was refreshing when the guy did that. I'm not kidding. It's actually reported that that's what Antonin Scalia said. Let's talk about Indonesia, where 8 men have been executed for nonviolent drug crimes. A ton of people emailed me about this. The New York Times has a very good write-up about it. And the prisoners were from Australia, Brazil, and Nigeria, as well as one Indonesian, all shot by firing squad at 12:25 a.m., I guess this morning, technically, just, last night. And relatives of the condemned to death were allowed to visit with the, I guess we would say, I call them the victims, but I guess they're the criminals according to the Indonesian justice system, but they were not allowed to witness the executions. This was the second mass execution in Indonesia this year. These were all for drug-related charges, Lewis. A few thoughts on this. First, my big thing is a lot of people in the U.S. have been saying, this is outrageous. Why are these people being executed for this particular crime? Can the U.S. really criticize this when we still have capital punishment? I know that we don't have it for this, but if both countries have capital punishment, it becomes a matter of shades of gray if both countries do it.
I think of all the countries that can criticize them, perhaps other countries have more of a right to criticize them for this. Of course, this is quite extreme, We do not take it to this level.
But the big line for me is, do we say that it's okay for the government to kill people or not? The list of what it's okay to kill people for is sort of like a second layer discussion. Obviously, there is a difference between you buy an ounce of pot and you're killed versus you kill 10 people and you're killed. I don't deny that there's a difference there. But the big decision that the countries make is, are we in the business of killing people or not?
Right. And we should not be in that business. Good luck convincing Indonesia of that. It's funny. After I read this, I thought, well, in this country, in Indonesia, they end people's lives because of these nonviolent drug offenses. In the United States, we just ruin people's lives because of it.
Exactly. And I was thinking I should either be glad that we don't do this in the U.S. or worried that it's going to give the extreme right-wing authoritarians some ideas.
Well, they've got those ideas. I hear this is Rick Perry's favorite story of the year so far.
Rick Perry loves this one. Yeah, a guy who he just doesn't worry about innocent people being executed by Texas. It's just not a concern to him, even though statistically we know that it's happened numerous times. Send me messages on Twitter about this, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'll remind everybody we've got a big show-related announcement coming up later this week. I hope everybody will be with us for that big announcement. And I'll remind you that our program is funded directly by our audience through the membership program. And today's new member of the day is Jesse Murray. Jesse, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Jesse gets all the great member benefits that you can read about at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also support our show with any Amazon.com shopping you do if you go to our website, davidpakman.com. Click on that Amazon banner on the right side of the page, and then just use that link whenever you shop. It sends us a little kickback. Let's get into Hatriot Mail.
Hatriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased, independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
I see a direct connection between the story we did in the first segment today about the Supreme Court hearing oral arguments around same-sex marriage and this Hatriot Mail. Let's take a listen and see if you hear the same link.
Gay marriage is anti-natural, for God's sakes. Marriage is based on forming a family through sexual relation between a woman and a man. This is not about religion or not David Pakman. Gay marriage is not logic. You cannot have a babe with 2 penises or 2 vaginas. You have to give more power to the state so that the stage break the nature with social engineering, taking abandoned kids or artificial babes and giving them to these's people. It would be interesting to know where David Pakman Show get the resources to make these's silly shows.
Lewis, it's stunning. I mean, just stunning. Have you ever seen a babe with 2 penises?
I have not, but we talked about genetic modification. Anything's possible.
Yeah. Do you agree that there's this increasingly, maybe the bad spelling and grammar and insanity of that is brought on because this individual is just so scared of what's happening at the Supreme Court level now around same-sex marriage?
That could be it. Or just really angry. I mean, sometimes you're so angry you can't even type correctly.
Yeah, that I think happens a lot. That would explain a lot about the emails we get, that's for sure. That's Hatriot Mail for this week. This is a crazy story, Lewis. I mean, you might have to do the story because there's an anti-gay Republican named Randy Boehning, okay? He is a big anti-gay advocate. He's a North Dakota Republican. He's voted against bills protecting gay people from discrimination. He has now been caught exchanging nude photos, including of his penis. This is Randy Boehning, with another man on the gay dating app Grindr. Boehning refused to identify who he believes is behind exposing him, and he thinks that it's political payback for Senate Bill 2279. But this came, Dustin Smith, a 21-year-old Bismarck man with no known connection to the Capitol, contacted the forum of Fargo Moorhead earlier this month saying he recognizes Boehning from a gay dating smartphone app called Grindr, and that he was chatting with someone called Top Man, and that Boehning sent Smith some suggestive messages, sexually suggestive messages, and also nude pictures. And it is random that this guy just randomly contacts the media. So there's a question as to whether this was provoked by someone or what exactly went on here. Boehning has confirmed he is indeed Top Man and that he's bisexual, Lewis.
Well, it's great that he has stopped denying this. He could have tried to play the Anthony Weiner card and just hide it and say, oh, it's not my penis. I can't say with certitude it's my penis, and so on and so forth. But you know what? If I'm going to applaud this man for anything, it's for actually admitting that he is interested in men and that he did this. Well,
he said that his family and friends didn't know that he was bisexual. They thought he was an anti-gay heterosexual man. And he says that 1,000-pound gorilla has been lifted. Wow, who knew it would feel so good to let his hypocrisy out of the closet? An anti-gay legislator who is bisexual, part of the LGBT community. Now that he feels so good about no longer lying, maybe he can make himself feel even better by not being a hypocritical bigot anymore.
Well, I think his policies on LGBT rights probably helped him achieve office. So maybe if he wants to keep his seat, he will still vote against protection for the LGBT community. I don't really know.
Yeah, he'll say, listen, all these straight guys who are anti-gay, they're not putting their money where their mouths are. I'm bisexual. I would benefit personally if we had better protections for LGBT individuals. And I'm going to pass legislation that will jeopardize a community I'm a member of myself. That's how devoted I am. It's actually a pretty interesting sales pitch.
It is. Now, I'm not that well versed in North Dakota politics, but I have some ideas, and we'll see what happens.
Fox News' Elisabeth Hasselbeck can always be counted on to say something completely disconnected from reality. Speaking of individuals whose connection to reality is tenuous at best, hanging by a thread, we could say, she argued this morning that having "In God We Trust" on our money in schools as a school motto is appropriate because we have "In God We Trust" as the motto on American currency. She interviewed some parent, pastor dude who says that this is all really great. There was some controversy over this because at Caddo Parish schools in Louisiana, they were accused of violating the First Amendment because their motto was "In God We Trust." But then the motto went back up after being taken down. Let's listen to the interview. Let's listen to what Elisabeth Hasselbeck said.
You know, say that I have one on, and I don't know if you guys can see this as well, but that they just were in awe that how quick the turnaround happened. I mean, within minutes of the last T-shirt being passed out, our FCA students passed them out to the students. So it was student giving another student a shirt, and within minutes, that was put back on the marquee. Our principal, Scott Amon, just couldn't move fast enough to get that back up.
Well, it's a job well done by the students there, and the I Stand initiative seems to work so far. If it's good enough for our money, it's good enough for our school sign. Pastor Ketchum, we thank you for your time this morning and your story.
Amen. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
You got it.
If it's good enough for our money, Lewis, it's good enough for our schools. I actually feel kind of bad for this pastor dude, right? When it's all said and done and you look back on your life and your legacy was fighting for a school to keep saying "In God We Trust" as their motto, something about that really makes me feel sad for this guy.
Well, I'd guess that he would say that it was a lifetime well spent. And, you know, the thing is, this shouldn't be on our money. It really shouldn't.
And that's the other thing. "In God We Trust" was not the original motto of our forefathers or whatever it was Elisabeth Hasselbeck said. The original motto was "E pluribus unum," meaning out of many, one. It was changed in the early 1950s, along with adding "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. It was the Cold War. Tensions were running high. It was sort of a sign of so-called patriotism. So Elisabeth Hasselbeck is also just wrong on the facts about, oh, this is always what our forefathers wanted all over our stuff.
Yeah, she probably isn't aware of that, but it doesn't mean that she wouldn't think that it was still the right move. I'm sure she does.
Oh, she loves it. It's very, very clear that she loves it. Or she's figured out a way to pretend to love it, to pander to the Fox News, Fox and Friends audience. And that's certainly not a surprise to any of us. Next, Zack Kopplin will be back on the show. He has uncovered that Louisiana schools are teaching creationism in science class. He'll tell us about it next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to have Zack Kopplin back on the show. He's a science education activist working on a campaign for evidence-based science to be taught in science class. And Zack, you've uncovered that that is not always what is going on, even in public school. You've uncovered some records that show both teachers and school board members conspiring to teach creationism in public school and in science class. Give us the details. Where is this going on? How'd you find out?
Well, I'd also add Louisiana legislators and or governor to the list of people who put creationism in science class. But back in 2008, we passed a law called the Louisiana Science Education Act, which allows the critiques of evolution to be taught using unapproved supplemental materials in science classes. Now, there are no legitimate scientific critiques of the theory of evolution as a whole as would be taught in a high school science class. That just doesn't belong there. And really, this is about teaching creationism, which is what Senator Ben Nevers, who sponsored the law, said. He said it was to have creation taught whenever Darwin's theory was taught. Governor Bobby Jindal said the same thing about the law. He asked, what are we afraid of when we teach creationism? And so they've all joined in. And in one school system in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana, I found out exactly how this law is being implemented. So I've got some emails from teachers who say they teach that snake leg nubs are proof of creationism. I'm not really sure how that works. I've got another email from a teacher who tells her pastor that what she teaches in science class reflects what she's learned in church, not just the science. There's a list of 20 teachers from this parish who've signed their name to a letter saying they teach the discrepancies of evolution without legal fear. Now, again, there are no scientific discrepancies to teach. The only thing that you'd be teaching in there is creationism. And it's taking place in this parish and in parishes across the state, from Terrebonne, which has a policy that says teachers teach evidence for both arguments. Now, there's only one scientific theory, and so the other argument is creationism. There are teachers or school board members in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana, who asked for developing guidelines to teach intelligent design and creationism under this law. It's happening all around Louisiana.
And doesn't a lot of the stuff, like, for example, snake leg nubs, if anything, wouldn't those further the theory of evolution as understood by science?
Well, yeah. I mean, snake leg nubs are vestigial organs, and they're strong evidence of evolution. The way this specifically was worded was it was a question designed to promote higher order thinking skills, which is actually a very common higher order thinking, critical thinking, are used as sort of political arguments for this law. If we can't question, then we don't have critical thinking. Now, that doesn't really work because a science class should already be teaching critical thinking, and if you have to pass this law to protect critical thinking, there's probably something else you're really getting at. But this email said this was for higher order thinking skills, and it raised this question: what is evolutionary change that supports both the Big Bang and creationism? And first, this is just evidence that supports evolution, has nothing to do with the Big Bang. That's a completely different phenomenon, but creationists often don't seem to understand that.
Yeah, wouldn't it be like saying, unless you can prove to me with the same evidence that both the theory of gravity and some other completely unrelated theory are true, then neither must be true. I mean, it's a bizarre assertion to make.
Yeah, and the origin of the universe and the diversity of life on Earth are completely different questions.
Right.
I mean, there's different types of evidence. One is looking at Earth and one is looking into the stars. Like we wouldn't expect that kind of evidence to show that, especially like vestigial organs. But
Zach, in researching all this, some of the documents you requested, you were actually told by school lawyers that whether or not these letters exist, where teachers have signed on to teaching science in this way, that they're not really considered part of the public record, right?
Well, that's sort of, I mean, I was told that. So I found out about, and I brought up this, the big smoking gun for me is this letter with 20 teachers' names on it, because I have evidence of school board members across the state who view this law as implementation of creationism. I have emails from teachers which show, like in the classroom, this is what they're thinking. But I didn't ever really have evidence that it was systematic, because it's really hard to know what's in every single classroom across the state. And so I found out about this letter, where it was a letter from one parish's school teachers to another school board suggesting they adopt sort of a similar policy that follows along with the Louisiana Science Education Act to help protect teachers who basically teach creationism. And they didn't say it in those words. They said the discrepancies of evolution. But again, if you're teaching discrepancies of evolution, if you're teaching both sides, that's just another way of saying I'm teaching creationism because there's no scientific discrepancies in evolution to teach.
Isn't it also kind of like saying we're teaching both science and non-science in science class?
Exactly. And so I found out, I read I was looking around, I've been searching and searching for this kind of evidence for years. And in November, I actually have to thank the Creation Museum because I just Googled something and this article from the Creation Museum popped up. And it cited this letter with 20 teachers that was sent to the Central School District in Louisiana, supporting their policies. And I was like, wait a second. If that has names on it, those are the names of teachers teaching creationism. And so I requested this from both Central and the Ouachita parish where the letter originated. And so Ouachita told me, at first they said, oh, we remember that letter, we'll get it to you. And then the secretary clearly talked to someone in the office who said, wait a second, don't give it to him. And so the next thing I know, I'm talking to their lawyer, who's telling me, this is not a public record, we don't have it, it didn't go through the school board office. We have nothing to do with it, so we don't have to give it to you. Which is first incorrect because it did go through the school board office, and the first signature is the superintendent of schools.
It's so also clearly funny to say we both don't have it and aren't giving it to you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we don't have it. We don't want to ask people. They claim they knew of people who might have it.
I see.
They didn't want to ask them for it, and so but it went through their office, and it's sort of like making the argument like just because it wasn't specifically approved, it's not a public record. Except that emails are public records. You don't specifically approve an email, so it's like saying, well, the superintendent of schools didn't sign off on that teacher's email. It was just a teacher's email, so we don't have to give it to you.
And along those lines, I'm interested in this whole idea of approval. Based on your understanding of the law, bearing in mind that you're not a lawyer, but you've been working for a long time on the specifics of this, would letters saying that this is being done be in and of themselves a violation of the law, or is all that really matters what is actually being taught at the class level?
So there's sort of two prongs of this. The first is intent. That's at least what you want to show in the court. So the intent of the law is being used the way it was intended. Well, sorry, that's the wrong. The intent of the law was being used to teach creationism. And so we have that from its legislative sponsor, Senator Ben Nevers, literally said when he introduced the bill, this is to teach, like he said, I'm introducing the law so that everywhere Darwin's theory is taught, the evidence for creationism can be taught too. Not exactly that quote, but something along those lines. Governor Bobby Jindal was asked about creationism in public schools in NBC's Education Nation, and he said we have the Science Education Act, and went on to explain a little bit about how it worked and to teach creationism with it. So that's the intent half. That we've got that ready for court. The second half is how is this implemented? So that comes from school board members passing policies, like teaching both arguments, that phrase, or saying that this is for creationism, and it also comes from what individual teachers are doing, which, again, it's good to have, and I'm looking for things like lesson plans from these teachers now. I've requested that because that's the next follow-up. Now that I have their names, I want to know what they were teaching or are teaching in their classes. And
aren't you worried, though, aren't you worried they'll know what it is that would be controversial and they'll just scrub it before sending you lesson plans, if they even indulge you in that?
I am worried that's also a violation of the law, though, for them to do that. And I'm wondering how much they'll continue. So, and this is the key thing from the public records request earlier, is I already have evidence that the Central School District blatantly violated the law and withheld this letter from me. They claimed it had been lost. It had been filed in their school board minutes, and they just said they didn't have it. And I actually found emails in a broader public records request to the Ouachita parish between Ouachita people and the Central School Board members, where they clearly had copies of this letter and just deliberately chose not to give it to me. And it was pretty clear from that. And so I've now said, if you do that again, if you withhold records that you're legally required to give me, then I have clear evidence of bad faith, and I'm willing to sue them if I think they're withholding records from me.
Last thing on this, we've been following very closely the rewriting of textbooks in Texas and just following that entirely. Talk to us a little bit about what is going on with the science textbooks being used in Louisiana, or maybe in particular parts of Louisiana. Is that also a concern?
So the science textbooks actually were adopted in 2010, and they are wonderful in Louisiana. We adopted them over creationist complaints. But there's always been this fight. So in Texas, the State Board of Education is just plain, or has been really loony. And so they decentralized the textbooks, so at least districts, like I live in Houston right now, so at least Houston Independent School District doesn't have to listen to the state board if they adopt something crazy, and they can use whatever good books they want. Now, in Louisiana, our state board is more sane, and we adopted good books. So the state legislature has been trying to pull that away from the state board and decentralize it so that the crazy school districts, like the ones in Ouachita, can use whatever they want. And we've been having that. It's sort of a weird inverse of Texas. In Texas, the biology textbooks did turn out pretty good, but the history textbooks, which were adopted in the fall have turned out not as great. Moses is basically portrayed as a founding father in Texas's history textbooks. And there was just sort of this whole list of things, like it was sort of to see what we won and what we didn't win. So we fixed climate denial, which was in some of the history textbooks. I don't know why climate denial was in history textbooks, but it was. We took out some really racist affirmative action cartoons, but Hillary Clinton was also, like on the flip side, they reduced the parts about Hillary Clinton because right-wing activists said that was campaigning for 2016. We didn't change part. There was a section of the textbook that said Islam spread through conquest, trade, and missionary work, and that really upset a conservative activist who insisted that we shouldn't include trade or missionary work, despite being valid ways of spread of religion, and that Muslims had only attacked or killed people to spread Islam. And he used the phrase "under the umbrella of some multi-syllable Islamic name" is how he described Islam.
Yeah, truly stunning. And the Revisionaries is a really good film for people who want to check out the battle that's been going on there. Truly incredible. Yeah. All right, Zack, excellent work on this. We've been speaking with Zack Kopplin, science education activist. Keep up the great work, and we'll check in with you and see how this goes.
All right, thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
As most of our audience knows, I'm against pseudoscience, I'm against scams, I'm particularly against people in positions of power or authority using that power or authority to push pseudoscience and scams. For example, we've talked about Mike Huckabee using his huge mailing list to push bogus cancer cures and other nonsense. We've talked about Glenn Beck pushing anti-vaccine nonsense, etc. Dr. Mehmet Oz, who's a TV doctor and a real doctor as well, is a huge culprit of this, and opposition to Dr. Oz has been building. There was a hearing last June where Senator Claire McCaskill talked to Dr. Oz about how he's been promoting this miracle cure of green coffee bean extract, which is completely non-scientific and non-evidence-based stuff. On other occasions, Dr. Oz has been criticized for just making outlandish claims about different products featured on his show. And a lot of the recent disapproval comes from his opposition to GMO food, because there's this long history of misunderstanding the impact of GMO food. And in spite of what some people say, we actually have plenty of studies about GMO food. And food being genetically modified in and of itself is not actually something that has been shown to be harmful to humans. Of course, the fact that a lot of GMO food also has pesticides is what we should be concerned about. But the GMO itself is not actually the issue. And around that, Dr. Mehmet Oz has been a huge fearmongerer. And nearly 2 weeks ago, 10 doctors sent a letter to the Dean of Columbia University's Department of Surgery, which is where Dr. Oz is employed, pushing for his dismissal as a cardiothoracic surgeon. And now there have been almost 1,000 other doctors who feel the exact same way, that Dr. Oz should be removed from Columbia's roster because of the pseudoscience that he pushes on his TV show. Dr. Oz's response is to say, "I vow to you right here and right now, we will not be silenced." I guess he means those pushing pseudoscience aren't going to be silenced?
Now I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a little while here.
Please.
Is it possible to separate these two things?
I was going to get into that. Yeah. So you could say, okay, he's playing a character on TV. He's playing a character doctor on TV, and he just so happens to have been cast and he happens to be a real doctor as well, right? And this should be kept completely separate from what he does at Columbia University. You could make that argument. The problem is, even if you can make that argument at a kind of fundamental technical level, on the record level, if you're going to live in the real world, you have to realize that when people say here, when the network says this is a real doctor and here's what he says, you're not really telling people this is a real doctor, but what he says on the show should be considered to be coming from someone who is not a doctor, right? I mean, you would have to really go out of your way, I feel like, to make that distinction in terms of his personas, whereas the show benefits from his credentials as a real doctor.
That is true. But if he is not pushing these products on people outside of the show, if he is not involved in this pseudoscience, when he is actually practicing medicine, well, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah, and I understand you're playing devil's advocate. Let's open it to the audience. What do you think? But if someone pushes, the type of pseudoscience he pushes is like me saying, hey, I put ground beef in my socks every night for a year before I go to bed, and I only got a couple of colds. Who knows how many colds I would have gotten if I didn't have the ground beef in my onions, in my ground beef in my socks, rather. Right? I mean, it's that type of thing that he's pushing, except it's about green coffee beans.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit better than ground beef in your socks, but it's a little bit more believable. But yes, it is still nonsense, and anyone watching should be able to realize that he's just trying to make a buck.
House Republicans yesterday unveiled legislation to sharply try to curb the Obama administration's moves to ease restrictions on travel to Cuba as part of the restarting of relations with Cuba. The provision was put in place by Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, a Cuban-American from Florida. It would block new flights and cruise ship travel to Cuba. He's basically saying we should not be rewarding Cuba with anything, and he's saying that if we expand these flights, we're trying to circumvent the tourism ban, and that it would also violate the spirit and the letter of U.S. law, that we are funding the oppressors of the Cuban people by allowing these flights and cruise ships to head to Cuba. I would ask, does our alliance with Saudi Arabia not directly fund a government that is beheading people? What about that? And what about the fact that that's been going on for decades, but only Cuba seems to be the problem?
Yeah, and how much money from flights and cruise ships would be going to Cuban oppressors compared to how much money we're spending on oil would be going to Saudi oppressors?
And let me take it further. Have the restrictions on travel to Cuba and the Cuban embargo moved the Castro government towards democracy over the last 50 years? How long? This is the epitome of Republican policy. We've been doing something for 50 years and it hasn't worked. And now they want to keep doing it because what? It's going to work any day now?
Yes, it does sound ridiculous. Now, I will add that, unfortunately, as soon as everything is completely opened up, Cuba's culture will probably take a huge hit. And it might even eventually disappear. In some ways, we've been doing them a favor. But overall, what is better for the people of Cuba, I think, is the most important question.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand what you're saying. I would like to go to Cuba before it becomes more Americanized with the chains and the whole thing, right? I get that. But at the same time, many Central American countries have those things and still maintain an identity. It's just that Cuba is so unique that I would be interested in seeing it before that happens.
I would love to do that. It is in the top 5, I think, of my list right now.
We will tell you soon what is on the bonus show today. But before I get to that, let me play a voicemail for you. 219-2DavidP is our voicemail number. Let's take a listen.
David, my name is Tim. I am a member, and I'm calling today in reference to your story on taxes and the rates that people pay. It always puzzles me why these debates go on about the rates that the federal government has for the different income levels, because it isn't reality. The reality is that these wealthy people, even though they may have a tax rate of 32%, their effective rate that they actually end up paying is at 15 or well below that.
Yes, no question about it. So our discussion was, let's just look at the rates in that segment. But you're absolutely right. If you consider the ways in which the 1% are able to remove some income altogether from their tax returns through trusts and offshore accounts and creative accounting, no question about it. If you actually look at the effective rate, not the adjusted gross income, the effective rates of the richest people are actually lower. You're absolutely right. That just was not the focus of that particular segment, but you're spot on. On today's bonus show, DARPA's magic bullets an International Space Station resupply vessel loses control, and Chipotle eliminates all GMOs from the menu. Will this make you go to Chipotle now? Is this a move that even makes sense? We will talk about all of that and more on the bonus show. davidpakman.com/membership. Don't miss the bonus show. Remember, big announcement. Probably the biggest announcement ever about the show coming up this week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.